You and I both know that America isn't reaching its full potential.
Well, inflation keeps hurting Americans at the supermarket.
Millions of American students are falling behind in reading and mathematics.
47% of Americans find it difficult to cover healthcare costs.
Some people think it never will.
70% of Americans generally pessimistic about U.S. politics right now.
I get it. I used to work on Capitol Hill. I saw the dysfunction firsthand for years. It was really frustrating, and that's why I joined Americans for Prosperity. AFP is the premier grassroots organization transforming policy in this country. I've seen Americans for Prosperity save taxpayers billions of dollars, stop special interests and corruption, bridge divides for a fairer criminal justice system, and give Americans more personal options in healthcare. Expanding freedom and opportunity is the key to unleashing prosperity for every American, and we're ready to partner with you to make it happen.
You can join millions of concerned citizens working every day to advance these principles.
You can elevate your voice to make sure you're actually heard by your neighbors and your representatives.
You can bring people together to advocate for the proven solutions to our country's biggest challenges.
Or cutting the red tape.
You can champion leaders who have the courage to do the right thing. And when they don't, we hold them accountable.
You can be part of a movement that has achieved thousands of policy wins at the state and federal level.
Bottom line, we don't win for any one person, party, or agenda. We win for freedom and opportunity, because free people are capable of extraordinary things. And together, we can see an America that's reaching its full potential. Join the movement to empower every American.
Oh, good. Let's see. Yeah, her daughter-in-law Amy used to work with me, and I just adore her. She's a Wonder Woman, and Jack. So seeing their kids grow up has been really enjoyable.
I built another restaurant. After each people.
I got to the point where clothes would come.
Get out when you feel get harder.
Yeah, I mean, kind of fancy college degree, government jobs, get out. It's just like, say you wanted to like be a farmer or whatever, you know, but okay, you stay all young and you gotta play what the game the Soviets want you to play, so go to the top.
Heidi, that's right. She's so big. But she's big from last time I saw photos. Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad you can.
Brett has requested, do you like to go up there and
A little bit of it. It's just wood.
yeah, because otherwise
So
you've got some people online. Yep. And again,
Yep, it's pretty cool.
this way,
Part of the reason I do more like this, just like all of it.
Hello, everyone. I just want to let everyone know that thank you for coming tonight, first of all. I just want to let you know that there is a bit of a delay, so you still have time to get your food and your drink, and we will be going here in probably 5 minutes. So kind of refresh yourselves, and then we can go ahead and start. Thank you.
I used to up to 65 or so. cheaper fuel ourselves. So that's interesting. So I think China's doing great. They're not communists.
Go down.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and to those of you that are online, I think I did see that there were 200 people watching so far. So, I know a lot of people couldn't make it. It's a school night and everything like that. So I appreciate everyone being able to tune in to this such an incredible event. I do want to thank Representative Kristin Robbins. The reason why we have this is our 12th event in the last 8 months, excuse me. And the reason being is because we host these events to bring policy during session or out of session, especially when people maybe don't know what's going on or don't know what's happened in the last year, and we bring these to their districts so that the local legislators can communicate what's really happening, what's really going on. So if you don't know me, my name is Joshua Solano. I am the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Minnesota. I want to thank my staff. Rayanna Lee, she's in the back at the check-in table. She's our Legislative and Coalitions Director. Maria Voigt, who is one of our Grassroots Engagement Directors for CD 6, 7, 3, and 8. And then Amos Webskowski, who is another Grassroots Engagement Director for CDs 1, 2, 4, and 5. So I really chalk it up to them putting on these events because they are the ones, the Grassroots Engagement Directors. They're the ones that are on the ground talking to people, helping set up these events for legislators. I do want to make a slight disclaimer beforehand. We are a 501c3, 501c4 nonprofit. So at these events, we will not be discussing campaigns or election issues, just keeping it strictly at policy here. I know Representative Robbins has a lot of policy that's happened last session and this session that she's willing to share with you. Again, I want to thank you all for coming. Americans for Prosperity is one of the biggest and best premier grassroots organizations in the country. We are in 38 state chapters, and we work on everything from energy policy to tax policy, government regulation, economy, foundational education, post-secondary education. So we do all of the nitty-gritty things that a lot of people don't like to talk about, because who wants to sit there and talk about taxes all day? I do, because it's one of those issues that affect us daily, especially here in our state, when we saw a $20 billion surplus go down the drain, $10 billion in tax increases, and they just want more. So that I'm very, very excited to hear from Representative Robbins today. And after post her introduction, we will be taking a Q&A on your tables. You have note cards. During the event, please feel free to write your questions on the note cards. This event is called One Expensive Minnesota for a reason. So we are talking about the spending, the government overreach, the government regulations. And so any questions that you have for us, anything that you have for Representative Robbins, this is the time to kind of air those out so that we can hear from you. So thank you so much again for coming.
Hey there, good evening. Thanks so much for being here. I'm very proud to represent Western Maple Grove and all of Corcoran, Medina, Greenfield, Independence, Loretto, and Maple Plains. So you are in the heart of my district. So thanks for coming out tonight. So I really appreciate the opportunity from Americans for Prosperity to come and share what is going on in St. Paul and how it is affecting your family's budget. I serve on the House Tax Committee, so I have a bird's eye view of what is going on with tax policy. And I'm going to reference the DFL, but not in a political sense. It's like an institutional sense. So currently, the Democrats, the DFL party, has full control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. So the policies that I'm going to be talking about from last session and this session are really laid at their doorstep because they have full control. We fight against these policies, we vote against them, but we don't have enough votes to overcome their majority. So that is why if I reference them, it's not necessarily trying to be mean or partisan. It's just the nature of the numbers and the math at the Capitol right now. So the big picture, Joshua already referenced it, is that last session we had a $17.5 billion surplus, and the DFL spent it all, and they raised taxes another $10 billion, and they grew state government by 38%, which is stunning. None of our budgets went up 38%. And that's even stunning by government standards. So when I was first elected, the budget increase in that biennium, we run a 2-year budget cycle, was 7%. And like that was shocking. My second term, the budget increase was 11%. And we all were like, hair on fire, what is gonna happen? We can't have an 11% budget increase. Last year, 38% budget increase. So they've even outdone themselves by like tripling the budget, the highest budget increase in state history, up to now 38%. It is completely unsustainable, as we talked about till we were blue in the face last year, and the February forecast shows that. So now, even though we had a huge $17.5 billion surplus, they spent it all, raised taxes $10 billion, and now we're looking in the out years at budget deficits. And they won't call it a deficit, they call it a structural imbalance. But when less money is coming in than is going out, it's a deficit. So just keep that in mind. So this is coming at a really bad time in our economy. So as all of us know from going to the grocery store, inflation is up. And I read a report last week that said Minnesotans on average are paying $13,000 more per household for their living expenses, groceries, gas, electricity, what have you, compared to 2021. And so all this record spending by government is coming at a time when we as taxpayers can least afford it. And that is going to make it even harder because, as I said, they've set us up for these deficits in the out years. And so they are either going to have to cut spending dramatically, or they are going to raise taxes to balance the budget, because in Minnesota we have a balanced budget amendment. So let's talk about what happened last year. Where did $17.5 billion and $10 billion in tax increases go? So the first thing I want to point out is that they failed to live up to a couple of their promises. During the 2022 campaign cycle, they promised to eliminate, actually, Social Security taxes.
That did not happen. They also said they would return the surplus to Minnesotans in the form of $2,000 rebate checks. That did not happen. There was a little bit of a rebate check. So if you your income is under $75,000, you got a check of about $260. That ended up being taxable on your federal income tax this year. So you cannot make it up. So that's where some of the money went. But then they had a number of other, so I serve on the tax committee, so they really wanted to raise taxes and sort of make sure the rich, what they define as the rich, were paying what they define as their fair share. So Minnesota, just to kind of give you an idea, we have one of the most progressive and highest tax codes in the country. So our lowest rate on income tax is 5.35%. And that just, we have 4 tiers in our system. So 5.35%, 6.8%, 7.85%, and 9.85%. Those are the 4 tax brackets in Minnesota. That lowest rate, 5.35%, is higher than the highest tax rate in 25 other states. So at our very lowest tax rate, we already are not competitive. And as it goes up, we have the 6th, with all the rates combined, ours is known as the 6th highest tax rate for individual income in the country. We also have the 4th highest corporate rate, and we also have one of the highest capital gains rates. I can't remember if it's 1st or 2nd, but most states treat capital gains differently than ordinary income, but Minnesota doesn't. So capital gains are taxed at the ordinary income rate, which is usually at the rate of 9.85%. And then last year they added a surtax to that. So anything in a capital gain that's over $1 million gets an extra percent added. So 10.85% is the highest on the highest rate. And so already we're not competitive. But last year, one of the things they wanted to do was add a 5th income tier tax rate. And that was going to raise $1 billion. Well, they knew that would put us into the top 2 for income tax rates, and they didn't want to be known for that. So they instead changed a whole bunch of deductions and raised the $1 billion, but they wouldn't call it a 5th tier. But effectively, we have a 5th tier rate that raised $1 billion in new taxes by changing a lot of the deductions. So Minnesota, our tax policy is so uncompetitive, especially with our neighboring states. So all the time when I'm out in the community, people are saying, oh, well, I'm going to move to Florida or Tennessee or South Dakota or Iowa. Iowa now joined a whole bunch of other states, and they've eliminated their state income tax. So this really matters when people are making decisions about where they want to live, where they want to start their business, where their kids are going to move back to. We were just talking that, you know, my kids currently don't live in Minnesota, and oh, do I want them to move back? But, you know, they look at the numbers, and I don't know if I'll get them back. Hopefully, if we keep fighting, we will. But it really has affected our ability to compete. And I'm an economist in my background, and fundamentally, what I share with my colleagues on the tax committee is that they just want to keep the same pie and divvy up all the money and keep handing it out. This whole tax policy last year was all about redistribution. And what they're missing is that we have to grow the pie. And the way you do that is by attracting investment dollars and talent. And when our tax code is so uncompetitive, we are losing in net outmigration a lot of our people and our investments. So we are not able to grow the pie to spend it on all the things my friends on the other side want to spend it on. So let's see, that was some of the tax things. The other thing I just want to mention that they did in the tax bill last year, which hasn't gotten enough attention, is that they really hurt the local communities by changing how gambling works. So right now, or until last year, local charities like the Lions, the Veterans, the JCs, those groups that do charitable gambling had these open all e-pull tabs. It was a huge moneymaker. And they were allowed to do it because it was making so much money, it enabled them to pay off the Viking Stadium early. And so last year, because of all the money in charitable gaming, which is taxed at, I believe, 36%, so people think, oh, we're playing these games and that money stays in the community with the Lions and the Veterans and whoever. But 36% of it goes to the state, to the general fund. And then on top of that, they were using some of it to pay off the stadium bond. Well, once the stadium bond was paid off, the charities were like, finally, we get to keep some of our own money in the communities. And instead, they pulled the Open All E tabs, and charities are losing all that money. And it's just been devastating to, you know, Hamel VFW, Osseo Maple Grove Lions, the JCs, Northwest JCs here in our area. So I've been working on this a lot. But that's something that may be taken care of this year as part of the sports betting sort of big deal that they had a big fight about today, whether it involves horses or sports betting. We're trying to say fix the charities as part of any of this deal. But that's a real blow to our communities, and that was just another way that they wanted to extract money from us. So here's a couple other things that were going on. A huge amount of transportation-related tax increases. So they increased the motor vehicle registration tabs 36% last year over the 11-year average life of a vehicle. They increased the filing fees for every vehicle by $8 on your registration tab renewals. There's a new 50-cent charge, a delivery tax, every time you get an Amazon delivery of $100 or more, 50 cents. And they expect that will raise $189 million. Isn't that shocking? They increased driver's license fees $6. The gas tax has now been indexed to inflation, and so we know how high inflation is, and that is really going to hurt us. And they expect that will raise $423 million over 4 years, indexing the gas tax to inflation. Isn't that awful? And for us who live in the metro area, we're special. And they did a 1% increase on the sales tax. If you've noticed that your sales tax has gone up when you've been at restaurants or just, you know, buying things at the hardware store or whatever, it's a 1% increase on the sales tax that took effect. And 7.75% of that goes to transit, which is basically to fund the Southwest Light Rail boondoggle that they cannot get a handle on. And the other 25% goes to housing. And we do have housing needs in our community. I absolutely agree with that. But this sales tax is so regressive. Like, they're just looking at all these ways to nickel and dime Minnesotans so they don't see it as, oh, my rate went up. It's just extracting $10 billion from our families in all these little ways. And it's really hurting our families, and it's hurting our economy. So we have to pay attention to that. And they also increased the motor vehicle sales tax from 6.5% to 6.875%, which is a big drop. It gives us the 5th highest motor vehicle sales tax in the country now. So it's just so frustrating to sit in the tax committee day after day and watch all these proposals come through and vote no and offer amendments. I offered an amendment to eliminate the Social Security tax maybe a dozen times. Like, it's not like we gave up, but it just always is voted down. And so I just want you to know, even though we were just facing this huge onslaught of tax increases this year, we did not go down without a fight, and we offered alternatives. Every time we turned around, we had an alternative on the tax bill. We had an alternative on the education bill. They also had a ton of new mandates this year, the Earned Sick and Safe Leave, the paid family leave. The paid family leave is an interesting one. It's going to be a $2.9 billion tax increase on employers and employees. And when they passed this, we said the tax on it is 0.7%, and it's going to be shared 3.5 and 3.5 between employers and employees. We said that won't nearly cover it. If you look at how this similar program has been rolled out in other states, every other state that's implemented this has had to raise the tax. So we had an actuarial study done as part of passing the bill. And sure enough, it came out in October, and they said 0.7% tax increase that will raise $2.9 billion is not nearly enough. And the actuarial studies showed that the tax at a minimum should be 1% and maybe up to a 1.2. So that means employers and employees are going to be swallowing this tax at either 0.5% of payroll, and then on your employee tax as well, or even higher, up to 0.6. this is going to kill jobs and hurt at families. Like, you already have enough taken out of your check. If you're going to get another 0.6% taken out of your check, that is really going to hurt families. So as I love to share with my colleagues, you know, these taxes that they want to use to redistribute everybody who's working and everyone who's paying taxes and take that money and give it to people who are, yes, less fortunate, but also not necessarily always working, are really hurting our families, and this redistribution is hurting our ability to grow the economy. And so we just have to keep the big picture in mind. A couple other things they spent money on last year: $70 million for violence interrupters. They spent $2.2 billion on education, and we had an alternative proposal that spent the same amount of money but no mandates. And what's interesting is, so they spent $2.2 billion, which, as we've all heard for years, was supposed to fully fund education, and that gave 4% on the formula in the first 2 years and 2% on the second year. And our proposal, the Republican alternative, was 5 and 5 on the formula, so they got it both years, and no mandates. Because of the unfunded mandates in the education bill, there were more than 60 that these schools have to absorb. Schools are now begging at the legislature for supplemental funding because they cannot afford all the new mandates. And it's actually hurt schools. We had the historic fully fund education $2.2 billion investment. And because of all the mandates, schools are actually worse off than they were before we passed that bill, which is so frustrating as a parent and as a community member. But it's also really frustrating as a legislator. Here we were supposed to really give the schools the boost they've been waiting for, and it actually was counterproductive. So I can't tell you how frustrating that is. Okay, a couple more. They increased fishing licenses 20%. They increased boat registration fees 150%. And they gave free college to everyone whose family income is less than $80,000. It's a new program called the North Star Promise Act. And I'm on the higher ed committee as well. And this is a program that I really dug into. And it's just bad policy design, right? So if you make up to $80,000, your kids would qualify for this free college program. 2, 3, however many kids. If you make $80,001, it's a cliff, and you don't qualify, right? This is terrible policy. Because when people are in their highest earning potential years, when their kids are, you know, high school, college age, they should be maximizing their earnings so that they're saving for their own retirement and increasing what they're going to eventually get in Social Security. And instead, we are incentivizing people to not make more than the $80,000 so they can get the free college. And people said, oh, that won't happen, that won't happen. I have literally talked to people who have said they are quitting their second job or they are working fewer hours because they don't want to break that $80,000 cap. So we are hurting the people my age who should be trying to maximize what their earning is in our, you know, mid-career years. And we have a very successful program called the State Grant Program that we could have put similar money into and expanded the State Grant Program so more people qualified, and that would have been a much better use of the money than this free college. And by the way, the free college goes to people who are here who are not citizens and are illegal, and they also have 3 other programs that now people who are not here legally can qualify for. They will now qualify for the Working Family Tax Credit, and they will also qualify for the Child Tax Credit, and they will qualify for the Homestead Tax Credit or the Renter's Tax Credit. So we are creating, they have a bill this session that would create us as a sanctuary state, but we already have the pieces in place that make Minnesota a magnet for people who would qualify for all these benefits, and that is hurting our state as well. So we absolutely need more immigrants. I'm all for legal immigration. You know, I'm absolutely for it, and we need more workers. I'm absolutely for it. But these programs need to be structured so that they're incentivizing people to come here legally. And it's also super important that all this redistribution is understanding how it's affecting the people who pay the taxes. And there's just no regard for that right now. Okay, we talked about the mandates. We talked about free college. So this is the last session. So what are we doing this session, you might wonder? Well, there's more. Oh, they did a huge energy mandate, which if you're an Excel customer, I don't know if you are, because a lot of us in our area are also Right-Hennepin customers, but my phone has been ringing off the hook from Excel customers who are already seeing their bills go up double-digit percentages. It's really stunning. So we're going to see more increases in energy costs because of all these new mandates. And one of the worst ideas of this session is they want to create us as a full-time legislature. So think of all the damage we do when we're there part-time, January through May. And right now we're considered part-time in terms of our salary and the salary of our staff and the benefits and all of that. But the majority is putting together an amendment or a bill that would put on the state ballot, because it has to change the Constitution, that would allow us to be a full-time legislature. And they've been setting this up for a while, because 2 years ago they passed, without proper vetting, a bill that would allow us to remodel the building our offices are in. I try to put this in my newsletter if you read my newsletter. So the state office building where our office is in, they've remodeled it. They're going to double the footprint, $730 million to remodel one building. It's so outrageous, and I have tried 6 ways from Sunday to stop this thing. Like, we've looked at all the ways they did it, and they're so sneaky and so planning ahead. They used a very specific kind of bond called a certificate of occupancy bond that we cannot pull back. And so then I was like, well, we'll stop the bond, and we couldn't stop the bond sale. So then I said, well, once the bond is sold, we'll just pay it back right away. But you can't. You cannot pay it back even if you want to for 10 years. And so we're stuck with this huge monstrosity. And to give you some context, the entire bonding request for all the University of Minnesota campuses and all of the Min-State campuses, so about 57 campuses around the state, for this year was $700 million. The entire University of Minnesota Min-State system. And for one building, we're spending $730 million. And for another way to get your head around it, the entire bonding bill for the entire state will probably be, north of $830 million this year for the entire state, all the roads, bridges, water treatment plants, et cetera, et cetera. And we're spending $730 million on one building. It is so outrageous, but that's how they're going to justify this constitutional amendment to say a full-time legislature. Because now we'll have this huge, giant building that now they're going to need to fill. Because as I've said a million times, they're building a $730 million building that's only occupied from January to May. Because now, since COVID, our staff works remotely when we're not in session. So literally the thing is empty. And there's a beautiful new Department of Transportation building right next door, so I said, well, why can't we move into that? Well, it turns out that was built with trunk highway bonds, and there's a prohibition on using trunk highway bonds for anything that's not related to transportation. But literally, there are dozens of buildings in St. Paul where the state workers don't go to work anymore. So this is just adding insult to injury that they're spending all this money on this new building. Anyway, full-time legislature is their latest idea. And then $100 million, this is a proposal this year, for universal basic income. So if you're not familiar with that, there's a whole school of thought out there that we should guarantee a certain level of income for everyone so that they can more easily get on their feet and provide for their family's needs. So it's, again, redistribution, and it would guarantee a minimum of $500 for anyone that's 300% of poverty or below. So I was curious of what 500% of poverty looked like, and I hope I saved it. Anyway, here it is. So in case you're wondering, 300% of poverty, someone who would get guaranteed from our tax dollars $500 a month, they would be making $45,000 as a single person. As a two-person family, $61,000. A three-person family, $77,000. A four-person family, $93,000. That's the 300% of poverty threshold. What? And we're saying we're going to redistribute $500 a month guaranteed to them for taxpayers. $100 million is what they're proposing for that this year. They also are creating a public option for health care, so that taking more people out of the private insured system and putting them on the MNsure system, which is taxpayer subsidized. So overall, even though it's not a budget year, they're proposing spending about $515 million this year in a non-budget year. It's unbelievable. So I know we need to wrap up here, but I just want you to understand that this is really about tax policy and budget policy and responsibility, and there are things we can do to fix it. I'm working with AFP on a potential bill that would create a trigger mechanism when the budget gets to a certain size, that we institute cuts or institute over a rolling average of, I think it's 3 years, some way to manage the budget. And I've just this session introduced 2 bills of my own. One, which is crazy, I didn't know until I started researching this, there is no statutory limit on debt in the state of Minnesota. So there's a guideline put out by the Minnesota Management and Budget Office that says you shouldn't spend above a certain percent of personal income, which is a weird metric. But there's no statutory limit. There used to be, but when we got in a budget crisis in, I guess, the 90s or the 2000s, they repealed the statutory limit. So I'm trying to get us back to a statutory limit so that if we have a different governor or a different MMB commissioner, they can't just ignore the guidelines. I also have a bill, this has been interesting. So in the state constitution, bonding bills are supposed to be approved by a supermajority, 90 votes instead of 68, to get bonding bills approved. And that's to make sure it's bipartisan and that the state is very seriously considering how much debt we're taking on. So they've invented a new category of bonding called appropriations bonds that are not subject to the supermajority limit. So that's how they passed the crazy $730 million office building, and they're increasingly using this category of appropriations bonds in ways that were never anticipated by the Constitution and I think are unconstitutional. So those are 2 bills I'm trying to get through this year to kind of give us some tools to regulate some of this spending. Unfortunately, neither bill was given a hearing. But there are certainly tools like that that we can and should use to have more fiscal responsibility. But I have to tell you, this is more than budgets. It's more than tax rates. This is about ideology. And this is something that we all need to understand and take back to our communities and talk about, okay? The DFL and my friends across the aisle, I'm friends with these people, right? They are really blind in their commitment to an ideology about equity. And equity, in their understanding, means changing laws to force everyone to have the same results. So our country was not founded on the idea that everyone should have equal results, equal amounts of everything. That is theoretical communism. And as we saw, for you my age or older, you know that that didn't work. But we also were not founded on the idea that government should own or control vast segments of the economy. That is socialism. And we are creeping towards it as our government regulates more and more parts of our economy, crowding out private education, private child care, private health care, private transportation, and other sectors. We see that with the Uber-Lyft debate right now. They are trying to crowd out what the market would do in the private economy, and that is going to hurt us. Instead, our country was founded on the idea that all people are equal under the law, and that if they work hard and use their individual gifts and pursue their dreams, they are creating prosperity and wealth for the whole country, not just for themselves. I think our country's founding vision of limited government, individual freedom, personal responsibility, and hard work is the best formula for personal and national success and strength. We do not need the government to run every area of our lives. We need to give people a framework, a very just, legal, regulatory, and tax framework that provides stability without stifling. And then we need to give people the freedom to go out there and invest and innovate and create. And then also provide a basic social safety net, which is part of our social contract, for people who are infirm, for people who are disabled, for people who have fallen on hard times. That is part of our American values as well. But it should not be guaranteed forever. We have to structure the incentives so that people are moving in the right direction to better their lives. So in closing, I just want to tell you about an experience I had a couple weeks ago when I was the token woman at a forum for Women's History Month at the University of Minnesota. I was a token Republican woman, I should say. And it was honestly really interesting. My fellow panelists, and honestly almost everyone else in the audience, really believes that their identity is based on the intersectionality of the groups they belong to, race, gender, sex, class, etc. And that based on those external characteristics, you are either oppressed or you are an oppressor. This is really what they believe. This ideology cannot coexist with America's founding principles of freedom, hard work, sacrifice, and achievement based on your character and your own actions. They see themselves, young, smart, brilliant people, they see themselves in a quagmire of oppression despite living in the freest and wealthiest country on earth. Worse yet, they've replaced the idea of liberty and justice for all with a demand for equity, which is forced numerical equality. But as we all know, the only way to equalize outcomes is through a totalitarian state. You cannot equalize outcomes in a free society. And a totalitarian state, as we see around the world, leads to repression, poverty, and corruption. We saw this in the failed Soviet Union, and we see it now in China and North Korea. In these totalitarian states, the ruling elite enjoy wealth and power, while the regular people have neither. We cannot let Minnesota go further down this ideological path. As Ronald Reagan said in his farewell address, I hope that we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There is a clear cause and effect that is as neat and as predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. So I am working every day at the Capitol to make Minnesota more prosperous and more free. Thank you to AFP for all that you are doing and for being here, to all of you for joining us. That's our charge. We have to go into our communities and show that freedom and prosperity are linked, and that is the American dream. And it's alive and well, but we need especially our young people to understand it. So thanks for being here. Happy to take any questions.
I want to thank Representative Robbins. We have some questions that we did take from online that I think that you'd be able to answer as well. But this is exactly why we partner with legislators that further the principles of human progress, that understand the foundations and the dreams that our founding fathers had. And I believe that you have one of the best state representatives representing you and your district, because this is the type of action that needs to be taken, understanding the numbers, understanding the algorithms that go into budgets, and that's what creates the change for everyone. So the first question was from the audience here, and it says, if you build the $730 million building, will they require the state employees to return to work?
I doubt it. I mean, we as the House have our own jurisdiction over our own employees. So the governor has jurisdiction over the rest of the state agency employees, so we cannot require it as a House. We could require our own employees to come back, but so far we haven't, and I don't know that we would. The reason we don't is because they say, well, people would just leave and take other jobs and people wouldn't continue to work for the state. It's sort of a recruiting retention metric, I guess, but certainly we can't make them come back. That's up to the governor.
How much, this is a question from online, how much money will it cost to go to a full-time legislature?
You know, my wonderful, I have to just give a shout out, my wonderful intern Ellie is here, and she has been doing research on this for me, and it's really interesting. Ellie has done a lot of work on this, and she has found that only 10 states have a full-time legislature. Most don't, and some states, including North Dakota and some, I forget exactly all the other ones, but there's a handful that only meet every other year. So that's the model we should go. But that being said, I think a full-time legislature, Ellie, correct me, like about $1 billion maybe?
Yeah, it was like, and then the salaries were insane, like to pay like over $20 million or $50 million depending on the state.
Yeah, so it's a huge jump for taxpayers who are already overburdened, as we've talked about.
This was a question from the audience here. If appropriation bonds are unconstitutional, what happens when they're found unconstitutional? Do you think they'll be found unconstitutional?
I don't think so. That's why they keep using them. There have been a few court cases on this that have gone, I'm not sure how far up the chain, but probably even to the Minnesota Supreme Court. And they have found, because of sort of the language, like how they also get around single appropriation bills. So the state constitution says each bill should be single subject. And the way they get around that constitutionally is they make the subject like 3 pages long and fit in everything but the kitchen sink. Well, they've done that with these appropriation bills too. So they've termed it in a way that it fits under a generic wording of the Constitution, but it's certainly a violation of the spirit.
Yes, and how, personally, I think, this is maybe a personal question, like, how do you rate the bipartisanship treatment of the minority?
You know, it's been, this session has been the hardest. My first 2 sessions, the House, I've only ever served in the minority, just to be clear. The House has always been controlled by the Democrats in my service. But my first 2 terms, the Senate was controlled by Republicans. So they needed us to help them get their bills heard in the Senate. So there was more of a give and take, more of a willingness to hear our bills because they needed us to get our Republican senator to hear their bills, et cetera, et cetera. But now that they have the trifecta, I would say they're much less interested in working with us. But I do want to give you some hope, okay? So I'm the co-chair of the Civility Caucus, and it's a bicameral, bipartisan group. So there's a Republican in the House and Senate, and a Democrat in the House and Senate, and I'm the House Republican. And my colleague, Representative Sandra Feist, is the House Democrat, and then our Senate partners are Zach Duckworth, the Republican, and Grant Housechild, the Democrat. And we try to get together with all of our colleagues once a month to just get to know each other as people. And I do think that helps the institutions of the House and Senate function better as a bicameral legislature. It also helps us build relationships and trust across the aisle so that when you are negotiating, you look across the table and you know that this person has kids or aging parents or, you know, has struggled with education or whatever. And it builds a foundation of trust. So I'm very committed to this bipartisan, bicameral work. And I think some of my colleagues on the other side are too. So even though we lose every vote, they're like my co-partner in the Civility Caucus, Representative Sandra Feist, we're working on a bill together about banning cell phones in schools. So there are things that are getting done on a bipartisan basis that are more common than I think the public sees because it's not really reported. But there are bills that pass out of committee with bipartisan support. The other night we passed the public safety bill, policy bill with pretty strong bipartisan support. So it does happen.
I think that's awesome, and especially in a state where it's almost literally 49%, and then the Rutler half, we're almost split electorally. So I think that that's amazing work. Any update on the Uber and Lyft deal?
You know, I don't know from today, but so Thursday, is that tomorrow? 2 days. So Thursday, the Minneapolis City Council is going to revisit their decision to have the ordinance that is causing Uber and Lyft to leave. So they passed an ordinance that required this really high minimum wage and a bunch of other labor protections. Mayor Jacob Fry vetoed it. They overrode his veto. And then they said, that's when Uber and Lyft said they'd leave. So we and Mayor Fry and lots of other people have been putting a lot of pressure on the Minneapolis City Council to reconsider their override of his veto. So if they do that on Thursday, we're in the clear and Uber and Lyft stay. If we do not do that, then there's a couple legislative actions that are being considered. Our side, Representative Elliott Engen, has put forth a bill that would just preempt the decision of the Minneapolis City Council and just put it back in the private sector where they can negotiate employee-employer relations and figure it out. That preemption bill, I think, is the cleanest, easiest, and best for the economy, but it is not really getting much consideration by the majority. The majority is taking a different approach, and they're negotiating with Uber and Lyft about a bill that would put in state law what the minimum wage would be, which to me is crazy. We do not want to have the state government legislating specific employer-employee minimum wages. Like, that's not the role of state government. So, but that also may forestall Uber and Lyft leaving. And if neither of those approaches work and they don't get the city council to stand down, then I believe they will leave.
This is a different question from deviating from budget. It says, how do we eliminate civil forfeiture without a conviction?
You know, I know there's bipartisan work going on this issue right now. I do not serve on the Judiciary Committee, so I don't want to get in the weeds on this. But I know that Representative Harry Niska and Representative Sandra Feist are working on it. And I do think that there's an argument to be made that you shouldn't seize someone's property without there being a conviction. But when I meet with law enforcement, you know, their concern is that if they leave $200,000 cash on a table where they've just seized 50 guns, that money is going to be put to no good use, and that's why they seize it, because it's been used in the commission of a crime, even though there hasn't been a conviction yet. So I think it's a very nuanced issue, and that it's really important that law enforcement and people from the civil rights groups are at the table, because we do have to provide for public safety, that the money is not used in further crimes while we're waiting for the judicial process to take effect.
And of course, you would know with the budget stuff with that, and I appreciate the answer. This next question, I would encourage, if it has to do with elections, to kind of talk offline with Representative Robbins after this event has concluded. Our sister organization, AFP-Action, can also answer some of those questions after the event has concluded. What is the likelihood of another bonding bill this year, and what may the cost be?
You know, first of all, I'm bad at predicting these things, to be honest. But I would say it's 50-50. So in order for a traditional bonding bill to pass, it needs the supermajority 3/5. So they need 90 votes. They need 11 Republican votes to go with it. And I know people are working on the bonding bill, both Republicans and Democrats. So I know work is going on it. Whether or not they will get the votes, I really don't know. And generally, we don't know till like 10 minutes to midnight on the last night of session, because it's always the last thing to happen, and it's usually traded for something else at a higher level, which I'm never in those rooms, right? It's the speaker and the majority leader and the Senate, and they are cutting whatever that deal will be. But if we have one, I've heard it'll be around somewhere between $850 and $890 million, which last year we did a $2.2 billion bonding bill, which was incredibly huge. So staying under $1 billion, I think, is more kind of a normal size bonding bill, but we generally don't do them 2 years in a row. So the reason people are pushing for it now is before COVID and before the last bonding bill 2 cycles ago failed, we'd have a budget year and we'd have a bonding year, and that was how the biennium went. And we got off cycle with that, so they want to put the bonding year back in the second year of the biennium, which is why they're pushing it right now.
We have time for a few more questions before we go to social hour. But how are we, I know you'd mentioned free college and things like that. So the question was, how are we going to pay for the free college?
Well, they raised your taxes $10 billion last year to pay for it. So the two choices are cutting spending somewhere else or raising taxes. So, and what's really frustrating is a lot of that money that they spent last year was one-time money that they used to create some of these new programs like free college that really are not sustainable beyond the 2-year budget cycle, as we've already seen with the deficits that are in the out years right now. And so they will have created dependencies on all these new programs, and then we're not going to be able to fund them. And so they'll either have to pull back what they promised, which is not usually popular, or they will have to raise taxes to fund it. And as you all know, Minnesotans are done. They are maxed out. We are paying the highest tax rates in the country, and they cannot afford to have more money taken out of their paychecks to pay for all these programs. So we really need to right-size our government. It has gotten out of control, and I'm really hopeful that in next year's budget discussions, we can have more of a conversation about, I mean, it would just make your head spin if you saw all the layers of programs that do, many of them, the same things. And all these nonprofits that get grants from all these different agencies, and there's no accountability. And government has gotten so big that it is beyond the point where we can actually manage it. And that's a problem. That's why we have these scandals like Feeding Our Future and other things. So we have to just stop, and we need to reassess and put money into what's working, and then cut some of this extraneous stuff so that we can really measure what's going on in government and make sure it's effective.
No, I think that that's great, because you had mentioned UBI, you'd mentioned all these things. I went to a tax committee a couple weeks ago, and they're talking about 20%, 25% corporate income taxes. So it's a big deal. You had mentioned this before with the education investment. I think they're being a little optimistic. Has there been any positive effects since that investment, or is there going to be just a rolling average of negative unfunded mandates?
When I meet with our school superintendent, so I have 7 school districts in our House district. So I meet with a lot of different districts of different sizes, and to a person, they're grateful for the money, but they're really frustrated with the mandates. And so a couple of the examples of the bigger ticket items for the mandates are schools didn't used to provide unemployment insurance for bus drivers and the people who work in the food service and the people who do like just the school year jobs. But now we've required unemployment for the people who are only working September through May. Now they will qualify for unemployment, and they'll be able to take the summer off and get paid unemployment. And the schools are desperate to change this because A, they can't afford it. Unemployment insurance is quite expensive. But B, all those people who used to work just the school year were incentivized to then drive bus for summer school or be a para for summer school or work in the food service for the summer programs. And now they're struggling to get people to sign up for those jobs, and it's really impacting their ability to offer these summer programs, some of which are through community ed and for pay, and that was a revenue raiser for the schools. So it's an example of it was working. And we've now created this whole huge problem that's really expensive that is really causing our schools to struggle. I would say the free school meals program has been quite popular, but it's very expensive. And so schools are, again, this is a place where they promised it, but the money is only going to be there a couple more years. And then I don't know how they're going to fund it. And the schools would have to take it out of their general fund budget. So it's really, I think, a ticking time bomb, but it certainly has been popular.
This is our last question, and it's a two-parter. Is there a way to fix or balance the budget before we hit the deficit, let's be honest, before 2026, can we restructure taxes? And then in the event of there being a surplus, what should be done with it?
I'm going to take that second one first. If there's a surplus in a future year, we need to cut tax rates. Because the only way to restrain the growth of government is by lowering the amount of revenue that comes into government. And if we keep running these huge surpluses, the majority just sees that as a reason to spend more money. So if we cut tax rates and reduce what's coming in as the way to balance the budget, it will really help us get a handle on the growth of government. But to the point of can we do anything about the out-year deficits now? Not really, because we're in it's a 2-year budget cycle. So we will have a budget next year, and that's the year we can work on it. And in the meantime, what was recommended by the state economists when they gave the budget forecast is that if we don't spend anything this year, if we just hold to what was spent last year, which was a lot, may I remind you, $17.5 billion and a $10 billion tax increase, if we just don't do any supplemental spending this year, then we would have a very small, I think it was like $35 million surplus for the coming biennium. But if we spend anything this year, it's going to enlarge the deficit, okay? So right now, what we're looking at is a $515 million supplemental budget in an off year. So, I mean, they're increasing the deficit. If we did no spending, we were going to have a small deficit. If we spend another $515 million this year, I think we're looking at probably about a $4 billion deficit. So, I mean, they are digging their own grave, our own grave collectively, by spending another $500 million right now.
And I think that that's a great way to end up and wrap up the conversation, because that's about what happens when we look forward. And we know that you are working so hard, so diligently. I want to thank you for all of the work and the conversations that we've had. This is really important. And I bringing this conversation to districts. Like I said, you're our 12th event. And this is one of those where I think people leave with more questions than they came in with. But that's a good thing, because not everyone's going to write a question on a note card. They're going to want to talk one-on-one, or they're going to want to talk to their neighbors and tell them. And so I want to just thank you so much for answering these questions and for giving us the lowdown of last year and this year. So everyone, please give a round of applause to Representative Robbins. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank, I believe we hit 250 people online. So the message is out there. The understanding of what's happening, what's going on in St. Paul behind closed doors, smoke and mirrors. This is why we have events with legislators, because we're able to be, like I said before, come out to the community and do these things. If you want to know more about some of the things that we're working on as an organization, policy-wise, you can talk to Raina Lee. Wave your hand. She's our Legislative and Coalitions Director. We also have some handouts on the economy, on healthcare, on education there in the back. So I want to thank you all for coming. If you have any questions for us or for Representative Robbins, we're going to take this time. We were scheduled until 8:30 to be here, and so now this time is yours. I thank you all for coming on a school night, 2, it's Tuesday, and thank you for everyone for watching online. I really appreciate it.
America was built on the idea that anything is possible with hard work and a dream. But it doesn't feel like that today. Our country is drowning in debt. Political division is intensifying, and the American dream is slipping away. President Biden's out-of-touch progressive agenda has only made things worse. Americans can't afford another 4 years of this. That's why Americans for Prosperity is committed to changing the trajectory of our country. Our unparalleled grassroots network is launching the largest effort we've ever undertaken. Together, we can win and restore America's promise with proven principled solutions. It's time to reignite the American dream.